Welcome to Umbrella Saturday. We have Wilmarie Tiflet. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, it's Wilmarie Dietlefs.
Okay, Tiflet. Okay.
But
And
close enough.
she's someone I really admire her works, and then I would just pass the mic over to her so we can jump right into it. I know we usually start at 10 on the dot. Just a bit introduction about yourself, your journey, what you've done at Rada, and what you've been doing, and then we just jump right into your slides. Good to go.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah, good to go. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Wilmarie, and I'm a foresight researcher and I'm a systems designer. My background spans over a decade in design, foresight, and cultural research, and I've worked pretty much across the globe. So I've worked with really everything from shaping visions for future cities through research and world building to studying how culture and technology shapes our daily life. And I'm really lucky to be a member of the Futures Community Radar, where I'm currently the Futures Design Lead. And at Radar, we're all about working together towards a better future through agency and imagination. So before we start talking about multi-species coexistence and rethinking our cities, it's really important for us to understand where we find ourselves today. So at the moment, find ourselves living through a permacrisis. And to explain what this is, we kind of have to start from the beginning. And this all started as the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So it was really the turning point. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, people have been experiencing crises, through millennia. Like there's always been reoccurring crises, but never has there been this real deep, like interconnected crises that was happening all at the same time that felt so, big in scale. It impacted literally every aspect of our life, and it really marked a significant shift. So, as the COVID-19 pandemic was happening, we were experiencing also global conflicts around the world. And as this was happening at the same time, we went from, a society that would experience crisis to a society that was now experiencing a polycrisis, which is multiple crises happening all at the same time. And this inherently triggered the global recession, which then triggered the permacrisis, which is where we live in now. And so the permacrisis is defined by this multitude of different crises all happening at the same time. They're all interconnected. As the one thing expands and like gets worse, something else gets worse, or something gets better, something else gets better. It's all connected. And what makes this a permacrisis instead of a polycrisis as that it's all happening at the same time, but it also feels like it's happening for this really extended period. And the period feels quite unknown to us at this point because of this interconnectedness. We almost don't know how to work our way back out of crisis. And within all of that, there within the permacrisis, we can look to these 10 mega trends that are kind of dictating the world we live in and the next decade. So this is global weakening institutions, demographic polarization, mass urbanization, growing wealth inequality, declining democracy, knowledge society, climate change, tech acceleration, and the mental health crisis. No, these are pretty bleak, but these are, the trends that shape the world that we live in. And many of these trends are a result of disconnection from each other, from the natural world. And it's really important for us to know what these trends are. It's really important for us to take them into consideration because we can only really work our way out of a place of crisis if we kind of know what the guidelines are and we know the reasons why we find ourselves in this crisis in the first place. So before before we step onto the next few chapters where we talk about the future, we kind of also have to know and understand the cities that we find ourselves in today. So many of the cities that we are living in today are maybe already in crisis or definitely like heading towards crisis. Mass urbanization is one of the most defining megatrends of our time, and it shapes economies, societies, ecologies. The way we build and plan our cities has to change. The urban environments we habitat today are like hotter, louder, more polluted, and humans are not the only ones suffering. So when we look at noise pollution alone, across Europe, more than 112 million people, that's around like 20% of the population, are exposed to harmful levels of noise. And continuous exposure to like noise is wreaks havoc on your health. It has massive impacts on your sleep. It heightens irritability. It fuels chronic stress. But we're not the only people experiencing the stress of this noise pollution alone. Animals are almost doubly affected by it. Animals rely on it for mating, warning, navigation, like almost everything. And birds near cities and near like noisy areas, near roadways, can sing at frequencies that are up to 20% higher than normal birds. But at the same time, they're producing 30% less chicks. And then this traffic noise has been shown to increase stress hormones in birds by up to 300%, which is significant. And I think lastly, and one of the most saddest stats I've like seen is that whales lose up to 90% of their acoustic range due to shipping noise. Like the whales literally can't hear each other anymore because we're so loud and we don't think about how it impacts anyone else or any other species. So similar to humans, the effect of chronic noise causes disorientation, animals are eating less, and even their immune systems are getting weaker. So our cities are failing non-humans, but really it's cities are kind of failing humans too. But the cities we live in now, we've basically built just for human existence, or what we think serves human existence. So we've built our cities on this anthropocentric bias in design and policy and architecture. And so when we look at the anthropocentric bias, it's this cognitive bias where people evaluate or interpret the world primarily through a human-centered lens. And this perspective overlooks ecological, cultural, and non-human factors. The human-centric cities of today see growth as the only measure of success. So as our cities are being governed by these extractive values, we're thinking convenience, efficiency, profitability. There's no way for us to really reap the benefits of connection to nature. But we can start shifting our mindset. And the pluriverse is kind of this post-growth concept. And it's a concept that rejects that there's one single way of looking at the world. And it embraces the concept of coexistence and diverse worldviews, perspectives, ways of life, even inhabitants. So the pluriverse really is built on the concept of coexistence, reciprocity, kinship. And so the question is, what if the future of cities wasn't just about humans? So we're asking designers, innovation, policy writers to really rethink about the way they think about inhabitants. If we want to live in these cities that are like cooler, less loud, more green, easy to navigate, we have to start thinking about not just ourselves, but the other creatures. Sorry. We're actually overlooking all of the natural forces that have made the world inhabitable to us in the first place. So at the heart of this multi-species cities and multi-species coexistence movement, there really is this paradigm shift. And it really is a paradigm shift from human-centric futures to more than human futures. And it's a paradigm shift that we often call from me to we. So it's thinking beyond just ourselves as humans, but incorporating, like expanding that to animals, the plant kingdom, etc. So a big cornerstone at the work of this research lies in the concept of kinship. And I really want to acknowledge well, firstly, it's such a beautiful and inspiring concept that is such a beautiful golden thread throughout this work. But I do want to acknowledge that kinship is with the natural world is definitely completely detached. Is really what is like separating us. And this drives the ecological crisis that we're finding ourselves in. But the reality is, like, when it comes to kinship and humans in the natural world, we share origin, we share ancestry, and we have an ongoing relation. This concept and this paradigm shift from us being this master above or ruler of nature to moving to a point where we are relatives to nature, we are kin with nature, we are connected to nature. And so kinship in its essence is really asking us to say, like, when you see a river, when you see a bird, when you see soil, and when you see that as a relative, you actually hold a responsibility towards them and not a dominion. And this creates a term coined by an indigenous, I think, writer called relational accountability. And that is what we need to sustain ecosystems. And that is what we need to shift the way we think about cities and to shift the way we live in cities. So on the first chapter, we're going to kind of have a little look at how we can design more diverse cities and cities with more diverse ecosystems. But instead of looking at through the lens of diversity, we're going to like shift it a little bit and say, like, instead of animals being an afterthought, what if we thought of birds, bats, bees, frogs as actual clients? So as cities are thus expanding, biodiversity is really integrated into the core of planning and design. It's usually just an afterthought. And green infrastructure will get mentioned in plans, but as soon as like there's budget constraints, then that's the first thing we cut down on. Or if it's like in any way compromising human convenience, we always cut back on biodiversity or in green infrastructure. But that essentially is resulting in like ecological deserts that we call like our urban spaces. So, what if bees and bats were nice to have? What if we treated them as clients with requirements, needs, and the ability to just fire us by leaving? So, what would a client brief from a pigeon look like? And what if we took those requirements as seriously as we took human comfort? So, would a pigeon ask for clean water, quiet spaces? Would it ask for flight corridors free from glass towers? And what would happen if we actually took those requirements as seriously as we take human requirements? So while we know that most urban plans completely overlook biodiversity, um, and we don't even integrate any of that into housing design, New Zealand's Department of Conservation has really been like flipping this narrative. So they've been running this campaign called The Count, and it's a really beautiful campaign. It's really actually quite like joyful and like fun. But essentially, they conducted a population census in 2023, which amounted to 5.2 million people living in New Zealand. But when they ran the campaign, they revealed that they had 69.5 billion inhabitants in total. And what this already is showing us is there's this complete paradigm shift in who we count, right? So in this, they're also showing us humans are this tiny minority in this multi-species nation, but yet we still design our cities completely for 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 humans, and we design nature out of it. So across the world, architects and designers are really exploring creative ways to make cities more wildlife inclusive. And with over 50% of bird deaths a year being attributed to skyscrapers and glass windows, birds are definitely like a focus for many. And interestingly, last year in Washington, D.C., there's a bird-friendly building act that is now a new mandate that says that all buildings that are higher than 100 feet must use bird-friendly materials. And there are many options in this area. They are definitely going to be more expensive, but I think what policies like this make really interesting is saying, if it's going to cost you more to make a bird-friendly building, many people would say like, that's not part of the budget. We're not thinking about that. But policies like this ensure that there's no work around it. There are so many solutions. There's specific glass that has like small patterns in it that reflect in the light, that make birds aware that that's a structure in front of them. There's like really delicate fine netting that can be used. There are all these different really innovative materials. And these kind of policies will also spur more innovation, more research, more design. So it's already like amazing that these steps are already being taken. But beyond just thinking about materials, designers are also making cities more invitive by actually designing like animal and nature specific shelters. So Cheng Tsung Feng's floating duck shelters provide this like beautiful aquatic habitat that merges ecological care with elegant design. So these shelters float on water bodies, and they create these beautiful little refuge zones that can be used in like urban and semi-urban waterways. And this is really beautiful because it shows how when we think about like how do we bring more wildlife into the city, we get these really beautiful design solutions that can really change the nature of our city and our parks. But a design solution like this is primarily like as an animal focused design. And I think this is a great example of how an animal actually becomes the client in an architectural or design project. And so artist Thomas Soprano's exhibition Web of Life at the London Serpentine does something quite similar. And it reimagines the gallery as this living open space that just invites all of nature in. So walls are open and it allows birds, insects, squirrels, and even foxes to enter. Um, and the space itself was adopted with these beautiful bird boxes, even beehives that bees could enter. And it's really beautiful to say that like there's a space in a city that like many of us go to, galleries, museums, these cultural sites, but we in a way we don't think of animals as being part of our cultural experience in a city, but this kind of exhibition opens the city up to animals and actually creates space for them. And this is a really, really beautiful example. I think it looks quite simplistic, but I think when you analyze it, it's really quite something. So the Spanish studio Temperos Extreme has designed this 50-meter water tower in a protected area in Luxembourg. So they really asked here, like, what if essential infrastructure served more than just humans? So the two different cylinders, the concrete cylinder is captures up to 1,000 cubic meters of water. And while doing that, like the way that it's shaped creates like little pockets for birds to create nests. And then the cork cylinder is designed so bats and falcons can actually come and like roost in it. So placing this really necessary functional object or this functional building within this kind of conservancy and then rethinking like, well, how do we design it for our neighbors? Like we obviously want something that's practical for humans, but we know that this is an area with high bird population, high bat population is really quite that's the kind of stuff we want to see. That's the kind of thinking that really invites that multi-species coexistence into design and into architecture. And then lastly, this is a bit of an older signal, but I think it's really beautiful. In Brighton, England, they've introduced a planning requirement that new buildings over 5 meters tall must have bee bricks. So these are these special masonry units. And so different to normal beehives, these are made for solitary bees. So by mandating that these habitat features in new construction has to be there, the city is really like encouraging people to think about wildlife from the ground up. It's no longer an afterthought. It's also reframing structures. It's saying like, hey, like if you build a house, you're not the only person who lives there. You have to accommodate the ecological system that you're building a house in. So for the second bit, we're going to look at the concept of nature as colleagues. So here, the concept of what if we stopped extracting materials from nature and started actually working with living systems to grow what we need? Architects are collaborating with fungi, designers are creating this amazing thing, this the cement that has like these bacterial microbes where the cement actually, the concrete actually heals itself due to like these natural compounds. And we know that like the more trees we invite into our urban spaces, the cooler they become. So this chapter really is about the concept of biocollaboration, and it's recognizing that other organisms aren't just resources for us to harvest. They're skilled partners with the capabilities that we as humans lack. So what if instead of working against it and working against nature, we started collaborating with it? So we know our cities are getting hotter, and as urban heat crisis is accelerating, there's never been a more critical time for us to start collaborating with nature. So we know that in the next few years, or in the next decade at least, temperatures will start going up from 1 to 0.5% to 3%, and cities will feel this much more. Like cities will experience longer, more intense heat waves. But a review in the World Economic Forum has found that if we raise the green spaces and green canopy in cities, we can cool our cities by almost 2%. And in a way, that's almost undoing the increasing heat in cities. And if we had to increase urban tree cover by 30%, we could cut like the heat felt in some neighborhoods by up to 7 to 10%, which is massive. And that's just such it's an easy solution, right? To like create more green spaces. Um, so another really interesting, oh, well, this is one of like my really favorite signals. But as our cities are getting warmer and they're heating up, our air quality will definitely go down with it. And so restoring these green spaces, as we've talked in the slide before, will become really, really important. But as we're creating more buildings, and we're having like increasing people migrating to the city, this becomes a bit of a challenge. So innovators like Respire are bridging that gap between nature and architecture. So this Netherlands-based group has developed this special concrete that essentially has these moss spores in it. So you will start by building a normal building with a concrete facade, and as the facade starts interacting with the natural elements, it slowly gets covered by moss, and it becomes a space where mushrooms grow, and like all kinds of like small microbes can attach to and grow. And this essentially turns buildings into these living walls and like living facades that just naturally like natural respiratory systems, and they absorb carbon dioxide, they filter the air, they cool their surroundings. It's really quite like an amazing advancement. So all of this is kind of part of this overarching theme of interspecies design. And interspecies design prioritizes the needs of animals over humans by creating structures that are optimized for organisms like fungi and insects, and design gardens with nooks and crannies for birds and pollinators. So the mushroom, it's a project by We Want More, is a mycelium grown installation that blurs the line between design and biology. And yeah, it's quite amazing to see what you can do. And I think like in the field of interspecies design and like rethinking materials, mushrooms have emerged as such a strong contender. They do so much more than just, build things, but mushrooms are actually like incredibly good at dealing with human-made problems. So something like this really cool speculative concept called the 79th organ, which is this fungi-made prosthetic device that's designed to basically like extract, filter, and break down microplastics in the human body. And what inspired this is there's a specific fungus that does actually eat plastic. Like it's really incredibly good at dealing with, this man-made problem. And microplastics have already been like, they've been in the zeitgeist. We've spoken about them a lot. Like the discourse around them is really like emerging. It's something that a lot of us are worried about. I think last year, 2 years ago, scientists in Japan found microplastics in the clouds, which is really hectic. And so innovations like these shows us how nature-based solutions can actually like undo the human-made problems that we've done. Yeah, so the concept of this is quite cool. Like it basically attaches to your lower abdomen, and then the fungi like enters your body, extracts it, and then processes it, like removing fungus out of your body. And there's some, yeah, I mean, this is honestly one of another favorite signal, but these these ways of collaborating with nature really fundamentally rewires the way we think about so many things. Like this is a very cool product. Like it's an actual product. You can order this that exists. It's called the Living Loop Cocoon, and it's this biodegradable coffin that's made from mycelium and it's made from recycled hemp fibers. And so basically within a week of ordering this, it'll be fully grown and you get buried in it and it decomposes with you. And I think it's really interesting, when we think about like our current rituals around death, many of them, like whether it be burial, or even cremation. Cremation puts a lot of like carbon dioxide into the environment, and like burials are getting quite like, and like I think there's a bit of a thing around space and like putting things that are like not able to decompose like into the earth. So this is a very kind of beautiful way to use and work with nature to even like think about the way that we think of end of life in cities. And so our last chapter, I had initially thought of like speaking about this and speaking from a place of, nature as pharmacist or nature as doctor or nature as doctor's room, because we obviously know that there are just so many, study after study showing that there's immersion in nature that really improves human well-being. It reduces stress and increases pro-environmental behavior. But we can't protect what we don't love, and we can't love what we're not connected to. And the reality is that contact leads to care. Um, we have this tendency to maybe go to nature to want something, and we have this idea of wanting to live in these species cities, but we don't have a connection to the species that we share these cities with, and we can't expect, to care for them unless we have a connection with them. So this chapter is looking a little bit about into like what happens when that really one-way connection that we have with nature really deepens and it turns into something more reciprocal and more tending. So over the past 2 centuries, humans' bond with nature has, weakened dramatically. There's a stat saying that from the 1900s, our connection to nature has decreased by 60%, which is really that's quite significant. That's more than half. Um, and that's basically due to mass urbanization. Like as our days and lives have become increasingly detached from the living systems that sustain us, we no longer feel the need to connect to nature or even feel this need to care for it. So I've been wanting to rethink this a little bit and say, what if connection to nature was treated as essential as urban infrastructure? What if having access to a park that you feel connected to is as important as clean water and access to electricity? So researchers have also shown that this disconnection that we're feeling has been passed down from generations. Kids inherit that sense of disconnection from their parents. And the National Trust in Britain has been surveying kids and been asking kids like, how much time would you like to spend in nature? And almost two-thirds of kids have said that they would love to spend more time in nature. But at the same time, when surveying their parents, um, th oh sorry, it was three-quarters of children would like to spend more time in nature. But when surveying their parents, two-thirds of their parents said they were able to take their kids to a park or into any form of nature once or less a week due to access. So the National Trust is really urging the government to step in and to make these 15-minute cities, 15-minute, this policy around being 15 minutes away from a park, like instill that and make and so that can happen. And when the National Trust was talking and having these conversations and did surveys, 80% of parents that have been surveyed said that they would love to be closer to parks. They would love to have access and have their kids have access to parks. And this is a really interesting thing that is actually from the radar community. And I think, yeah, what I find really interesting here is it says when asked to draw their trip to school, children who walk to school drew a more vibrant picture than those driven in a car. So you'll see on the right-hand side, it's beautiful, there's greenery, there's friends, there's so much more going on. But when you're being driven to school, it's like very just like monotone to get there, and it kind of strips you of, connecting to your environment. And when I look at this, I'm realizing that like not cities aren't necessarily just not designed for animals. They're actually really not designed for humans at all. Because when you see at the contrast between a city that's walkable and that's cyclable to a city like many of the big cities that we live in that, you know, look like this, like have big highways, you can tell that impact that it has on kids. Um, and this was a really poignant one as well from the community. And it was this post that says, why don't kids play outside more? And then when they showed this is the outside, it's a 6-lane highway on both sides with massive built with buildings and chain restaurants. And that is the outside. That is the outside. We are giving up our connection to nature and having the ability to have for kids to have these joyful experiences of outside, for growth, for more people moving to for acceleration, for things getting better. And on that same note, I think that it's interesting to see that like this way that we're living, even though it disconnects us from nature, it's also really disconnecting us from ourselves. This is a really interesting diagram that shows that in heavy traffic that has around like 16,000 vehicles a day, 1,900 vehicles in peak hour, people will have around 0.9 friends per person and 3.1 acquaintances per person. And then when you look at a city who has around 200 vehicles a day with 200 vehicles during peak hour, they have up to 3 friends per day and 6.3 acquaintances per person. So living in these like high traffic, super dense cities is not just making us less connected to nature, making us, like having massive impacts on our mental health. It's also eroding our sense of community and our sense of belonging. And many designers are really looking at how they can help kids kind of spark this um, curiosity and get kids back into nature. And there's quite a few really interesting concepts in this space. So two I've been looking at is Spot and Ash. So on the left-hand side, you have Spot, which is the screen-free little device. And it kind of works like most of those apps that you would use to identify species of plants. But what it does is like has a little scan, identifies it and gives you a little analog information. And at the end of the night, it uses whatever the kids have found and explored during the day in terms of species, birds, whatever they found, and actually creates this beautiful, imagine it like really imagination, like rich narrative that has facts and kind of like, yeah, really shows the beautiful integrative like journey that kids can have when they spend time in nature. And Ash is quite similar where it does that, but through like a kind of analog screen-free approach. And then addressing both the mental health crisis and our crisis of disconnection, there is this emerging therapy, ecotherapy, and it's a growing field that really integrates nature into mental health treatment. So psychologists are developing evidence-based frameworks that actually center a sense of respect or and connection with nature, which in return fosters well-being. So what this is about is not as simple as like we having therapy in nature, you feel better because it's calm. It's not just being in nature, it's actually the bond that you build with nature that is creating the impact. So this really beautiful quote by one of the psychologists developing these frameworks, Lisa Nisbet. She says, "You can boost your mood by just walking in nature, even in an urban nature, and this, even in just an urban nature. And the sense of connection you have with the natural world seems to contribute to the happiness, even when you're not physically immersed in nature," which is just such a beautiful finding, which means the more we cultivate that connection, the happier we are. But it's about cultivating the connection, not just spend time spent outside. And again, to harken back on the concept of kinship and how that's, something that's been part of many indigenous systems. this is a really beautiful example of how connectedness is being turned into methodology and used to measure our experiences in cities and in the world. So the AINA connectedness scale is a research tool developed through community participation research that measures Native Hawaiian people's connection to the land. And this really what it's all about is essentially measuring people's connection to the land and that connection to their health and their well-being. So it really looks at disparities linked to historical trauma and disconnection by focusing on the idea that having a strong relationship to the land is essential for our health and resilience. So this is a really beautiful way of how this thing that feels quite nebulous, like saying connection to nature, is actually designed into a scale that we can quantify, and we can look and start quantifying and measuring this connectedness, and like measuring it and seeing the impacts it actually has on our health, our well-being, and the way that we show up in the world. And we see this connection to nature being a through line in other things. PlantWave is a media company that uses biorhythmic data made from plants, and they turn that into music. So surveyors who've used this platform and this objects has shown that it's enhancing their productivity, it's put them in a state of flow state, and they really feel more at peace when listening to plant music. So yeah, it's a really beautiful signal of almost giving up what we would usually spend our time listening to actually just being in connection with nature and kind of looking towards that, and how that actually brings us more, in alignment and in a peaceful space. And then lastly, there's this beautiful signal from the Swedish brand Koya, and they've basically opened this forest-based perfumery, and they've really started reimagining nature becoming its own form of currency in a way. So how it works is, instead of paying the 599 kronas that you would pay for this little bottle of perfume, you pay for it by spending 599 seconds in nature. This equates to, I think, 10 minutes spent in nature. So this whole concept reframes the idea of value itself and really places monetary exchange with it time, attention, and transformation. And yeah, I think it's a really beautiful shift to how brands can also kind of start facilitating multi species experiences and brand experience. So I think to like just end today, I think a nice provocation as we move through our days and move through our city is really ask yourselves, like, who else lives in my city that is unseen but essential? And as soon as you put that lens on, it really helps you rethink the way the city is built and the way that you move and the way that you move through it. Cool.
Thank you very much, Wilmarie. To be very honest, I'm blown out. My mind is just blown. I have a couple of questions,
Oh,
and there's a lot of questions
yeah.
in the chat already. Conversations have been going
Oh
around
my I'm so
while you're speaking. A lot of conversation, but Mr. Shola says that what are your thoughts on places like Neon in Saudi?
Oh, I mean, it's a really complicated thing because places like Neon, ah, those places will definitely not be, I think, designed without taking some of these into consideration. But the reality is, uh, it won't be the heart of what they're considering. Um, you can places like Neon will be working also with like a whole set of different people. So I'm just gonna quickly hop back into the Zoom so I can see everyone, and then I would like to I just realized that I did not take my charger.
All right,
Um,
that's fine.
yeah, here I am. Um, can you give me 1 second and then I move from here to here. I'm so sorry. Um, Yeah, it's quite a complicated ask because I feel like cities like that, when you look at it and you look at this massive glass facade, they're obviously not thinking of these this multi-species existence. They're ultimately not considering how how um how they live, in harmony with their environment. And I think with spaces like, the line, you fall into a problem area where you build this space and you have this idea, and then people say, like people have said about it, I think there's like this discourse where people said these people must really hate birds, like look at this thing that they've built. And what happens then is then you're retrofitting animals, and retrofitting multi-species coexistence into like afterwards. And I think that is the problem. I think I think we need more building policies that focus on multi-species cohabitation. I think that's why the things around like the buildings in Washington, D.C. and the bee bricks and all those things, they might seem small, but I think those are the kind of things we need. Those are the kind of things we need people to think of before people even start drawing up these big, concepts of the future. There needs to be something that says you have to consider everyone except just humans. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. A couple of other questions. Are there like African innovations already drawing inspirations from this natural world that you can point to?
I must say, I don't really know at the moment, but I should definitely do some research. What I could do is have a little look and like send you some. Um, I think I think sometimes when it comes to climate action, we can often I don't want to say like lag behind a bit, but maybe it's more that like everything that happens, like in the global north gets all of the attention, and then things that happen in the global south don't. So I think even in my own research, I have a tendency to look towards those signals because they're easier to find than the ones that are, African centric, just because they get less publicity. So that's actually a really good question. And I'm actually glad that you brought that up because that really makes me realize I don't actually put that lens on my work and my research when I do it.
So just a quick thing. I think there is something in Namibia. There's a
Oh, yeah.
project in Namibia. I don't know exactly where it is, but there's a project in Namibia that is considering this. I mean, I guess because they benefit from, two types of cultures and two types of
Yeah.
climates, right? So they have the desert and then they have the green side. So I think there is a project somewhere in Namibia. So maybe if you want to start looking in
Oh, yeah.
Namibia first,
Thank you.
maybe.
Do you know exactly what they're doing? What the project is about?
No, I think it is something to do with this building a good ecosystem that's green and friendly and yeah, that's what I
Awesome.
think. All right.
Okay. I'll have a look at it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting topic for me because, like I said, in one of the comments I made to Mr. Shula's feedback, um, oftentimes founders are talking about AI. We're talking about a lot of technology, this and that, and nobody's really considering the impact on the ecosystem or on nature itself, right? And how truly can we collaborate with it? Well, we're just taking from nature, but we're not really collaborating with nature. And I think that that's part of what you said that just opened my mind
Yeah.
to a lot of conversations that can happen in Africa, right? Usually we're like dumping grounds for a lot of things, but if we start to work with nature, maybe we might just be able to start to build for the future before things start to get really bad.
I know, and I think when we were talking at the beginning, I wanted to say something because I've been thinking a lot. So I've in the last 2 years of my life, I've moved from the city and I now live in a very rural area. So I live in an eco community. It's very different to my like city life. And while living here, it's created such a big impact because I spend so much more time outside in nature. I grow my own food, and it's really made me rethink the way that I work with nature. But a really big thing that it's shifted my mindset on, and I've been listening to this really excellent podcast, and it talked about how it's so impossible for us to think beyond the realm of capitalism and this kind of extractive economy that we think about now, that sometimes we say, oh, well, we've got these billionaires who are building bunkers for when the world ends, but they're the ones who are completely, like they're the one polluting the environment. They're the ones who have the power to like reverse it. And it's this concept called capitalist realism that says that it's easier for us to rethink the end of the world than for us to rethink a different reality. And I think that's something that multi-species cities really we need to start that shift is what we need. We need to start saying like this isn't going to be it's not about profit, it's not about efficiency, it's not about or like efficiency like for humans. We need to start reframing what is important, like realizing that actually that connection is the thing that we're missing. And we can't build our cities around it and for it if we don't care about it. And if we can't even imagine it, you know what I mean? It's like almost a lack of imagination sometimes. We want things to be like just this way we've always told, and we see ourselves, as like this a world that works in this specific way. Like we see ourselves as being disconnected from nature and separate from nature, but it's really asking for an individual paradigm shift. And I think that is really happening. I think that there's many pockets of the world that is already doing that.
Okay, I think I had a question. If African founders truly collaborated with nature, what kind of innovations or even economies might emerge from it? Are you
I want to see where that question is. What kind of innovation and economies might emerge? Well, I mean, so I think again that there are innovations and economies that actually probably exist already that are in collaboration with nature. And I think that's why I really wanted to talk about that kinship. Like in South Africa, we have this concept called Ubuntu, and Ubuntu says, I am because we are. And it is intrinsically based in understanding that connection and understanding. So I think sometimes it's actually like turning around and looking back a bit and looking at the things that we've progressed from to actually be the kind of things that inspire innovations. But I mean, I think that there are just so many ways. I think that the more we start looking towards nature and the more we start, especially looking at our kind of, you know, bioregional, like natural spaces, and we start looking at those spaces and we start looking at what works in nature in those spaces, those become the building blocks for innovation because it's looking at a system that happens in nature and be like, this happens in nature, this works. How does this apply to a building? How does this apply to infrastructure? And I think that is I can't tell you exactly what those innovations are, but I can tell you how to like shift the mindset a bit and how to go look for them. I think that the reality is that inspiration is there. We just have to be able to tap into it.
Okay, I think that the next question was someone mentioned that he was interested in exploring African spirituality and future urban city development.
Exploring African spirituality. Yeah, but I think that question that Makati is asking is also really interesting because I think that that's why I kind of wanted to bring in some of those images about like how our disconnection from space is so intense. And like the reality is like the world we live in now, we're so disconnected from each other, from nature, from our culture, and all of those things, like looking back at our spiritual practices, like within many spiritual practices, I think there is this intrinsic sense of unity with the natural world. And I think when people are living more in line with their spiritual practices and kind of drawing inspiration from that, I think that our cities will naturally become more multi-species inclusive.
Okay, thanks. I think the next question is, how can our cultural philosophies like Ubuntu, yeah, you mentioned it already, or respect for ancestral lands guide us towards more human urban futures? And I think you already spoke about that already. Where you said Ubuntu is I and then we or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all of those things that actually I think that's what the wonderful thing is about so many like indigenous knowledge systems. Like indigenous knowledge systems actually it's the oldest knowledge systems in the world. They're systems that have been intact and have worked for so long because they honor that connection. And I think the more, I mean, obviously, we don't want to take indigenous knowledge systems and tokenize them and reclaim them as new inventions. That was really important for me. I don't want to come in and say, "Oh, kinship, we must all be this." This is a very, like, it's a very beautiful thing that indigenous people have been protecting for a really long time. And I think it's people who maybe are more Western centric or like as you the whole West needs to kind of like stop seeing the Western and like Eurocentric view of the world as this, only scientific best way. When you open yourself up to looking at indigenous knowledge systems, this is a wealth of knowledge, and it has the knowledge that many of our systems don't have because we're so focused on growth.
Okay. Eben asked, oh, someone already just said it's a brilliant session. He needed to jump up, so that's fine. Eben asked, what are the downside of these initiatives and how do we mitigate or adapt?
The downside of initiatives, how do we mitigate or adapt? How do
Do
these
you want
initiatives?
to unmute yourself and just ask the question clearly so that
Yeah,
Eben, are you there?
let's see if he's there. Yeah, I think he's there.
Let me just ask you.
Well, I wonder if he's perhaps asking what is the downside. Yeah. I mean,
So maybe the
I would
question is,
say the downside of initiatives,
maybe that's the question.
yeah.
Maybe that's the
Yeah,
question.
are they? Well, probably, I would say probably would be less profitable, slower
Uh,
to,
Sorry.
slower. They,
Hello, please, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
yeah, can hear you. Sorry.
All right, please. Apologies, I was having issue with my mic earlier on. Right. So, my question, if I will clarify, is when I say are there downsides to this initiative, and so I think originally or normally there's usually like a clash between nature and man, right?
Mm,
So I'm saying this because I'm from Lagos, Nigeria, and there's stuff like when you mention concept like deforestation and stuff like that, deforestation ideally would usually in a way the upside to it might be um the economic value of trees and all of that. But then again,
mm,
there's always a downside to like nature and stuff. So
mm,
when we start saying we want to accommodate nature more often, and then you made mention of, say, human being as like we're like the minority in nature. But then again, say we want to allow, say, in the designs of our buildings, we want to say for beds and all of that. And then, not to sound somehow, but animals are animals.
mm,
Then it's not ideally when I build a house, um I'm not particularly building because there should be am I going to put this? I'm not particularly building because I don't have animals in mind ideally, right? And so
yeah.
when I make provision for animals, animals will also animal would how do I put it? Animals have their way of doing things which might not go hand in hand with my way of doing things, right?
Mm,
Um, what those I think are kind of like downsides to it, right? Because it might disrupt my way of life, ideally, right? I don't know if you
yeah.
understand me.
No, I totally understand what you're meaning, and I actually have a personal anecdote of this where like I live where I live, like the swallows have now returned after summer in Europe, so they're here, and I've been having a swallow's nest built on my house. And the first one day I sprayed it off with water because I was like, I don't want to swallow, like they're loud and no, 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 no. But after a few days, I actually decided that I can just go and like knock the nest off when they leave for winter. But if they don't make their nests in time, then they don't mate and then they don't actually create babies. And so, in some way, if we want to live in harmony with nature, I don't think that we can expect for that to happen with no discomfort to us. I think that in that, that is the process of almost unlearning, because I promise you, our ancestors were far less bothered by bats and birds than we are now. And I think it is a bit of a it's a bit of a mindset shift to think about how these policy changes will sometimes be frustrating. They will cost big buildings much more money, but are we willing to continue on without doing that and risk even further habitat loss and risk even losing even more birds? Because the reality is that future is not a future we want to live in. It's going to be a bit of like a hellscape. So it is asking us, to make a bit of, I suppose, consideration on what we see as our way of life.
Okay, thank you very much. That very much answers the first part of my question here. And I very much agree with you. It's going to be it's not particularly very convenient at some point, but then again, when we have a mentality shift and then we see the plus side to this initiative, that's a very good answer. Thank you very much. And so the second part of my question is how do we promote this initiative outside of law? This part of the world, usually when you want people to do things, you make it the law, right? But
Yeah.
I say as a person, sometimes I'm a little bit more motivated to do things if I can see certain needs, certain reason for it outside of the law, right? Because if
Mm,
I do it because of the law, it becomes a duty in a way. But if I'm doing it because I see the good and I think
mm.
this is over time is like very nice. So what kind of initiative or what are the ideas that could, motivate people to do them naturally outside of law?
Well, I think some things, and I think like let's say for instance the signal I mentioned around ecotherapy, I think that's a really interesting thing for me because it's actually and I think this is can be like a psychological thing, but also like a way that we teach kids. Like I think like bringing forms of ecotherapy like from the ground up and then helping kids, like you said, if I feel strongly about something, I'll act on it. And the reason why we don't act on things is because, well, why we don't act on diversity loss and biodiversity loss and like, you know, climate change and these things is because we almost don't feel connected to it. Like we don't feel like it's our responsibility. So I think one of the like key things would be from the ground up to find initiatives to help people um foster that connection. And I think another really thing that can happen from a government side that doesn't need to be law, but can be like a government policy is parks. Like people don't have access to green spaces. How are you meant to have a connection with nature? How are you meant to look at a bird and be like, it's okay for you to build a nest here if you never interact with the bird? You know what I mean? So I think like there's definitely like governmental impact and like shifts in that sense that I think can really help without it needing to be forced on us or needing to be law.
So what would you say about the real estate boom where every land is seen as an opportunity to erect buildings, right? And not build parks, right? Almost every bare land is a thought process for the next real estate building that you're looking at, right? Government as
Yeah.
well is not thinking about parks. I can barely, maybe in
No.
Lagos, in Lagos where we live, you probably can count how many parks that you see. And the parks are not gardens or they're just
Yeah.
a few play areas for kids, and that's what is called a park, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to some of the things that you say should be. I think this is a conversation that like you mentioned earlier, a lot of policymakers need to start to rethink nature itself. But what's your take on the real estate boom? Because I think that that's as well as eroded nature itself.
I mean, I wonder sometimes when I think of real estate boom, I also think of how many spaces and cities that are like, like that were once really popular and then have gone derelict and now are like a little bit empty, like ghost towns, like buildings that no one lives in, like old factories. And then I think of, yeah, I don't know. I think that obviously like it's that's a very complicated, that's definitely like a one of the one of the perma crises where they're all interconnected, because now you're talking about like you know population growth is exponential. We need to make space for people to live. People deserve to live in homes. People are like moving to the city because we've got like concepts of like capitalism driving people to the city. I think it's like when it comes to the property boom, it is an outcome of so many interconnected megatrends, but it is something that if we wanted to solve, you would need to have to really sit with a bunch of researchers and policymakers, and you would have to explore the question of how do we house people safely in cities while accommodating for nature and green space. So I don't necessarily have the answer, but I would say that is probably my first place that I would go to when trying to solve that problem. It'll take a long time to kind of solve that, and I think, yeah, that's a very tricky one. You've stumped me a little bit. I'd have to like go do like a month's worth of research to figure that one out.
All right, that's good. I see someone's hands up, so let's take him and then let's go back to the comment question session. Please, you can unmute yourself. Your name is not.
That's good.
Your background is a bit noisy, but go ahead.
Well, see, so you're talking about spring flight. Although I was not like from the beginning of the class. Can you hear me?
Festus, your
Can you
background
hear
is
me?
a bit muffled. Can you get a clear space?
Let me.
All right.
Yeah, it's perhaps if you
While that
type in
Festus
settings.
is coming back with his questions, I think that we just go back to the question box. How can technology help us see nature, see the natural world more clearly, its rhythm, its limits, and interconnections?
Yeah, I think it's
Does
a good
technology
question.
play a role there?
Oh wait, can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, I think it's now my network that's unstable. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think there is definitely already innovations in that. I think something as simple as that plant wave, that catches these biorhythmic like data and turns it into music. I think that's a really beautiful example of how the people are already thinking about this. I actually have my research board here. I want to see if there's a few others, because I definitely know there's quite a lot of innovation in that space. But yeah, I think it's again that
That's
kind
nice.
of like bio.
Collection is
Sorry?
overlaying too much on that thing.
Iben, you said what?
Hey, apologies, please. I didn't know I was still.
All right. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely this concept of what is it called, like bioengineering, like already like using and looking at these methodologies and then creating, meditation apps and things inspired by nature. All of these things are already showing that those things are happening in that field. People are already interested in doing that. So yeah, I think the more we as society, the more we kind of push this concept of connection to nature as being like, the starting point of progress, I think designers and developers will tap into that and start making products that lead from that space.
So are there already existing communities, right, that are driving these initiatives across Africa? Are they like, so for instance, if I wanted to get in tune with this and I wanted to join like a community, can you hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit.
All right. I was asking if there are communities, right? If there are communities that are driving this initiative across Africa, that, for instance, if I wanted to join such communities, would that be possible?
I think so. You know what? I read about this last week and I put it on my research board because I thought it was quite important. Oh man, I can't remember the exact initiative, but they definitely are. I can also have a little bit more of a deeper look into this and send you some links, because I know I was looking at this specifically and I found it, but I must say my brain is a bit saturated by a lot of information sometimes, so sometimes things I lose them a bit. But I think there are definitely initiatives. I know that last year was the UN summit for future generations. And there were many people who, within that, were advocating for future generations through environmental preservations. So if it's not groups, it's definitely individuals who are advocating for this and driving this in local politics. So I think I can have a look and send you some lists, and then yeah, you can have that. But I definitely know of quite a few of my colleagues who would be better connected to that than I am.
Okay, so I think my final question would just be, what example exists of African innovations or innovators using data or AI to protect forests, wildlife, and coastline? Do you have examples of that as well?
I actually don't know African innovators, but there has been someone I've recently been looking at called his name is Steven something. I can't quite remember his name. Let me see if I can find it. And he's been using basically AI to create these really interesting apps. So for instance, one of his apps is really fascinating, which gives you regional, as you travel to space, it'll give you regional in kind of like a weather app, but it'll tell you what migrational patterns are happening in your environment at that same time. And at the same time, these things get pulled into giving you, giving you more information on whatever is happening in your area. And I think that those kind of things are really wonderful. But I don't I don't know if African specific ones. That's another good question to research.
All right, I think we'll bring you back. Festus, I think you can unmute yourself now so you can speak.
Okay, can you hear me? Is the background okay now?
Yeah, it's best. Yeah.
So she was talking about spirituality, and unfortunately, I didn't start from where you guys started from, but I picked it up from somewhere. So there's this guy that asked a question about birds and man, that birds not having the same personality as man. So what I want to say is that spiritual control the physical. I'm a very spiritual person, not because maybe because I attend a spiritual church or something like that, white garment church. So what I want to say is because anything that happened has already been completed in the spiritual realm. So for you to actually understand or try to connect with people, everybody is entitled to a spiritual guide. So your spiritual guide should be the one to tell you this and this. So spiritual is more like your day-to-day how will I say activities. So spiritual control the physical. That's what I'm trying to say. But I want to ask, is there any open programs for things like this for you to get inspiration, for you to get access? Sure, you understand?
Okay, yeah, that's
is my question for you.
Okay, so she's asking if there are programs for people who are interested in getting into this field. Are there programs? Are there initiatives that they can get into?
Definitely, definitely. I think there are so many fellowships. There's a really incredible fellowship that I think closes at the end of the month that's all about essentially giving funding to people who are basically in conversation with their space and people who are trying to navigate and create like a communication with their surroundings. Opportunities that speak to this, and they're not opportunities that are like always available, but they're things that come up and then people are like, oh, this is a fellowship, we want more people who are, inspired by ancestral or like indigenous knowledge systems and to create like space-based methodology within this field. But I think within communities like the community that I'm a part of, Radar, these are the kind of things that we love exploring. It's not necessarily just about, KPIs and like how do we get the strategy across. It's how do we think about things? How do we bring our spiritual beliefs, our everyday beliefs, and how we then take those things that are so important to us and shape our worldview and how we help to navigate the future using those. I hope that answers your question. I don't have necessarily like a deep knowledge of where to point you to in terms of how to develop that. But I would say it starts by cultivating your digital and physical ecosystem a little bit and like interacting with people you admire. And I promise you, the more you interact with people who you admire,
Okay,
cool.
I get you.
All, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just additionally, say something. Okay, I wanted to say something.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Festus.
Should I go on?
Yes, please.
So, like I said, I won't say I'm from a white garment church. So what I was taught is that when you were born, everybody is born with a spirit. As you are born in this world, there's an angelic being or a spiritual guide that was entitled to you as you were born. There are like two spirits, your ministry angel and your guardian. Your guardian angels are going to guide you on your day-to-day activities, what is good and what is bad. So for you to am I right? Am I there? Am I on the page? So for you to understand people, you need to actually so there are ways to connect with your spiritual guide. There are ways to speak to you. And there are ways that your spiritual guide speaks to you.
Oh, I think he jumped off. Oh, I think you're muted.
I think we lost him, but I just want to appreciate you for joining this session. It's been a great one. I don't want to take your whole weekend.
No, thank you so much for listening to me talk about birds and bats and bees. That was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for connecting. It's been a great one. Thanks for everyone who joined the session. I
Thank you
think
so
that I
much.
will bring you back. Sorry, I think I'll bring you back sometime next month, next year. And then we'll do something. But that for me, this was mind blowing. It wasn't the regular tech conversations that we will have. Is how do we even rethink nature in all what we do, right? So that we're not building more products, more technology innovations that degrade nature itself in the real sense of it. Is how do we even collaborate with whatever we're building in such a way that nature also benefits from it. For instance, I was even thinking anyone in health tech, if that person was thinking the way I was thinking, would be that I start to rethink the therapy that you mentioned, nature therapy, and make it a thing that I imbibe into my application. If I was if I was doing anything AI related, I want to also use, go into data and see how data and AI can solve problems for nature itself, and also put it back as part of my sustainability plan, because again, these are some of the things that investors are basically looking towards. As what's your ESG sustainability plan? Some of these things go beyond just saying that we do a lot of CSR, or we're doing this, or we're giving back to nature. It goes beyond even carbon credits. You know, a lot of people, when they think about, you know, sustainability, it's carbon credits and the rest of it, that's they start to think about climate and the rest of it. So if we are building in Africa, for me, I'm thinking that this was a mind-blowing session. I'm also even thinking, what are the possibilities of even getting into this space where, you know, it becomes something that we start to push. I don't think anyone is doing anything in Nigeria about this. I don't know. I stand to be corrected, but I don't see anything.
It could be you.
You know what I'm saying? You know, so for me, I think that's where it is. So thanks, Wilmarie, for the session. I like I said, I wasn't going to keep you longer than I had promised, and it's a pleasure having you on the call. So till next month, where we have the next Umbrella Saturday, I think that it will be a great session. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.